Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Sarah.
So,
I like today's episode.
I like today's episode. We've already recorded it. I like doing it this way around because we know what's coming and the listener doesn't. Normally, none of us know what's coming.
I also like it because we can tell you if it's going to be a good episode or not.
Yes, we will be very honest.
We're going to be really honest.
When we do rubbish episodes, we'll tell you at the beginning so that you don't need to listen to them.
So that you just don't listen. You give us a rate and review.
Yeah.
No, I did like this one. This one's about, we're talking about weight today, weighing scales, weighing yourself at the doctor's office. We get into that a bit.
Yeah. And this was a listener's request because I often get asked by people, is it okay to weigh myself? I'm doing this, I'm doing that in terms of knowing my weight. And is that okay? So we give you a definitive answer to everything you could ever want to know about weighing yourself in this episode.
You'll never have a question again.
Exactly.
Just wait till the end.
So I've got a question, Steph, if you're up for answering it.
Always.
Do you know exactly how much you weigh?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been on a scale in 3.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't need to. I don't have a desire to. I never was someone, I don't know, maybe there's like two camps, right? Like I find that there's people who like just avoid scales like the plague, like don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And others who like obsessively need to know. And I've always been someone who just like, I never was drawn to weighing myself. It was always something I avoided, always. So to me, it's not something that I have any desire to do.
Mm-hmm. I probably know my weight within 4 or 5 pounds, I think, or a couple of kilos. So I do have doctor's appointments where I'm weighed, and we can certainly talk about being weighed at the doctor's in this episode. And I would feel quite comfortable saying I don't want to know my weight, but I'm also okay knowing my weight.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good goal.
I think the neutrality can fluctuate a bit. To say that neutrality is completely static and there's nothing in it at all for me probably wouldn't be entirely truthful. I recently went away on a retreat and I was hungry on the retreat. There was, as far as I'm concerned, there was just not enough food, and the meals were very regimented as well. There was no snacking. And I remember coming back from the retreat and I'd said something to my dad about it. And he goes, "Oh, you've probably lost weight." And for a second, I was like, "Oh, I could just see." And then I thought, why do I want to see? And I just asked that question. I was like, why do I want to see? And I was like, well, it would just be interesting. I was like, well, if it's not that big a deal, then you don't need to know. And I thought, yeah, I don't feel like I need to know. It's not that big a deal. It's this, for me, there's this funny thing with the scales where it only feels okay to weigh myself if it's not that big a deal. But if it's not that big a deal, why do I need to weigh myself?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice setup for you.
Yeah. So I end up then not really, but I do have a pair of scales in my bathroom.
A pair?
Yeah, that's what we say in the UK. We say a pair of scales. I mean, it's one scale. It's a scale, but we say a pair of scales.
That's interesting. It makes me think that you have 2 scales in your bathroom.
One, because if you put one foot on each one, like the number's much more pleasing.
I was like, no wonder you don't mind.
It doesn't bother me. They're not laid out on the floor. They're tucked kind of way behind, sort of like a wash bin or whatever. But I thought of, doing a whole video where you smash the scales and that. They were quite popular on Instagram for a while. And I meant to do that. And then it's kind of gone out of fashion to smash the scales.
It's been done.
Yeah. They don't bother me and I don't find myself pulling them out and checking. And if someone said, "Oh, I think you need to throw your scales away," well, fine, take them.
Yeah.
I really don't care.
I don't, we have a scale in my house. My husband will use it every now and then. It's been in my bathroom. I don't even see it. Like it is nothing to me. I don't, however, admittedly, if I stepped on it and looked at a number, it would get to me. And I know that. And it's not that it would get to me. I don't even want to say it would get to me. It has potential to attach somewhere to something. And it would probably trigger me for a while. And then I would let it go. But why do I need to? I don't need to. Like there's no, it doesn't give me any information that I can use and that I don't need to do it. So why would I do it? Because I think that there's a visceral reaction sometimes to a number, right? Like based on old processes in your body, right? Or like in your system and in your brain that remember what a number means, and it has some story about it. And it's like, I could work through it, but I don't want to.
Imagining my reaction to different numbers. And this is the trap I see a lot of people. I often have these conversations where if you step on the scale and the number is lower than you thought it was,
right,
there could be that initial flush of excitement. And then that, for me anyway, and a lot of people I work with, that overthinking starts.
Exactly.
So now food choices start to become tainted almost by this idea of, oh, is that gonna keep the scale moving in that direction? Is it not?
Right.
If it's higher than expected, I think for a number of people, particularly if you struggle with disordered eating, and I probably would too, if I stepped on the scale and the number was much higher than what I thought my weight was, I think I would have a reaction to that I would need to work through.
Right.
So that would then bring up a load of challenging feelings. So that kind of doesn't seem like a weird
something you want to do on Wednesday. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I just don't see the benefit in something like that. That said, there was someone who messaged me and they said to me they'd recovered from an eating disorder and they had some kind of smart scales that go straight to their phone or something. And they'd been giving themselves a lot of permission, and they were in a larger body now. And they said they got on the scales every week, once a week, and they didn't look at the number. It went straight to their phone. And sometimes when they were feeling distressed about this whole permission thing, they would look at it and it would be this, for them, it would be this sort of reassurance that their weight wasn't suddenly changing just because they had a week where maybe they were hungrier that week and they ate more. And I don't know, they were claiming, and this may be true, I don't know, they were claiming that for them that they felt like they could use it in a very relaxed way, that it wasn't something that they felt fixated on. But then it brings up this question like, is it problematic to use the scales for reassurance?
Right. And I think for some people it can be like to that point of challenging the idea that we're growing without bounds, right? Or this feeling like we can really imagine ourselves to be, oh, I ate this thing and now you feel like you've gained 20 pounds. And then you're like, no, it's like this reality check in this way. But at the same time, I just think it's like, what is that saying about potentials for change? Because eventually there will be a shift. So the reassurance is still rooted in something that is conditional. There's times where, I think especially for analytical thinkers or people who really like data, right? And like I've had a few clients who said, I'm going to take the number for what it is, but I just need to know because I like having data. And I can understand why I can understand why you could potentially be neutral about that data. But the data itself, to me, is like, it's as comforting as it is in a moment for someone who likes to have concrete measurements of things and just kind of knowing where we stand or where we are, no matter where that is, and being able to say, I can make peace with wherever that is. I just want to know where it is. It's an orientation factor. And I do understand that and have appreciation for our need to orient to something and like have a relative idea of something. But when I think about how I feel inside around that and the short-term soothing of that versus how would it feel to if that option were taken from me, right? Like if there was no opportunity to collect that data, there's actually rather than it feeling like, oh no, it feels like, oh good. And I think that's important information. This exists also around pieces of clothing, like the body checking I used to do with this certain pair of jeans. If those pair of jeans were still hanging around, there's this idea that I have this data somewhere that's accessible to me that I could just go find something out. But I'm so glad those jeans aren't around because it's like, I don't have access to that data now. And that makes me feel actually freer. Because what would I do with that data? And also what would my future self do with that data? I'm like, well, then in the future, what if I put those jeans on one day and even if they fit me today, it's like, there's always going to be this thing hanging around that may interrupt my peace. And just knowing that exists on one hand is like, okay, that gives me some measure of control. And that's really what we're after, is that feeling that everything's under control, which we all need to a degree. And I'm not saying it's bad to have a need for something like that, but also that it has such a potential to become more than that, more than just a reassurance, and that it is loaded, and it will always the potential for that to always be loaded is there. And then that's just like this thing that like, it's always, to me, if I never weigh myself again, if I never can body check again, if I never have to compare myself to any version of myself here, now, before, later, then great. To me, it's like, good, then I can focus on other things then.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about the significance of numbers and categories, because we have stones here in the UK. So we have weights and stones, which my Polish friend used to just think that was the cutest thing ever, to weigh yourself in stones. But so one thing that's often quite significant, or feels significant for people in the UK, is the idea of getting into the next stone bracket. So if you're 12 stone 13 pounds, 12 stone 13 pounds, and then you go from 12 stone into 13 stone 0, that can feel like a real, even though the difference is £1.
Yeah, it's the next,
the category.
It's like being in your next age bracket.
Yes, or a next size, or and so often people have this idea about wanting to be in certain brackets. They're happy to fluctuate as long as they don't go into the next stone, even if the difference is just a matter of £2 or something like that. And also that significance was just coming to my mind with numbers, and I definitely experienced this, how different numbers feel the same when you see them, depending on whether you're going up or down.
Yes.
If you're going up, a certain number could be quite distressing, but if you've been higher and on the way down, it can feel different as well. And also, one that I found before, when I'd gone down in my weight and then I'd gone up again, even though I was feeling much more stable in my recovery at this time, in my mind, I was remembering how I felt last time I was at this weight, and thinking, a few years ago when I was this weight, my body was horrible. So how can I say that it's now okay at this weight? And that was a real comparison thing about what numbers mean about certain points in life.
Well, yeah, there's associations that we build into them that are, one part of your brain can deconstruct and make sense. And that's, I think, what we're talking about is like, even though there are parts that can make peace or have a different logic about it, there's something inside. It's the same way when you see a picture. We talked about this, like the visual cue. There's something about that number association, what that does to certain parts of our associations that are more subconscious. We don't necessarily have that quick control over those thoughts, and they happen as feelings. And I think we have less of a say over that initially in that moment. And that's why, like, we can be impacted differently. We can be impacted by a number that has an association with a bracket, that has an association in our culture, that had an association with the time of our life. All of those things flood in at once, in one go, which is a lot to contend with as you're trying to get dressed. You know what I mean? Or it's just a lot of things to do because it is just a number, but it's more than that. It's got a lot attached to it. It's just, there's a story with that number in any number of directions. And to really, truly neutralize a number is years of work, more, and potentially never. I mean, there's certain associations that just come with it, right? But yeah, when you go to the doctor's office, though, so you do get weighed at the doctor's office?
Not as a GP, I wouldn't. But when I go and see my endocrinologist, my consultant for my medication, all kinds of things like that, I'm okay with it, and it feels relevant then compared to the routine checkup at the GP.
Yeah.
That said, if I was at the GP, I'm trying to remember the last time even being at the GP where they've ever asked me to get on the scales. I can't really remember. If they asked me to get on the scales, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of me thinks maybe I should be objecting just so it's, to make
a statement.
Yeah, to make a statement, to make a point, to make it more normal for people to decline to be weighed. I don't know. I know you put on your stories the other day that you were at the doctor and they asked if you wanted to be weighed. Were you weighed or not at the doctor's at that point?
No, I always declined weight. I had put it on my stories because it was the first time I was asked. So I think there's a learning curve at doctor's offices in some places, because in that I've been to that doctor's office before and I've never been asked. I've always declined, and that's been fine. Actually, one time, it depends on who the medical assistant is. So one time I went in, and anytime it's been the female medical assistants, they have been like, okay, and they move on. And they're like, all right, blood pressure then. And they just keep going. But once there was a male medical attendant, and it was the only time I ever saw him, and I declined. And he made a comment. He said something like, really now? Or he questioned it or made a sarcastic comment about it. And I remember I was really annoyed. I was like, well, first of all, it's unprofessional. Second of all, don't. Like, just, you have no idea. He was a thin man. And I was just, I was just kind of like, oh, yeah. But in the beginning, like, let's say 10 years ago, I had started declining my weights long before it was a movement. This is just because I didn't want to know. I remember there was this pushback. And so what I ended up doing is saying, okay, well, then I want to take a blind weight and I'm just going to turn around. And can you just not tell me the number? And that was okay with them. But now I know that they don't even need that weight. And so it would make me angry. It's kind of like, if it's not relevant to this appointment, which it's not for medication purposes or, anything, no edema, nothing like that, then why is this part of it? And I like the fact that it's getting to be normalized. The fact that I am walking into the doctor's office and they're just asking me, because it must be a thing for enough people where it's like, do you want to or not? Like, it's an option that I'm being told it's an option, because most people don't know. And it causes a lot of stress a lot of times for people leading up to appointments, where like, I know I have to get weighed and I almost don't want to go. I want to cancel the appointment. I'm like, no, you don't have to get weighed actually. But that's not just presented as an option.
Yeah.
So I think it should be normalized. And I think it should be a question that is getting asked. But even when you turn around, like, I used to be like, I know how many notches they went over. Or I would see it in the chart afterwards in the follow-up summary.
What kind of scales do you have at the
old
hospital?
one? Yeah,
wow.
And so I'd be like, they went over this many instead of this many. Or I could hear if they went, if the thing went all the way over versus if it went, I was like, they must be at the next bracket because they're only going over a little bit. And so I would be able to figure it out, or I would see it later. And it was just that idea that it existed somewhere to me. I was like, I don't want that. I don't want to be a number. Like, it's more helpful in my mind if that is not a concrete thing, because then I will identify as such. So to me, it was a way of helping, of supporting my own desire to disattach from that number, as much as it was about fear. It was like, I don't want to be attached to a number.
I'm the same, but there's part of me then that's like, so I'm gonna know it and work on detaching from that number. I almost go this other way in terms of not wanting it to have that power over me. And I think, because I spoke a couple of weeks ago in the guilt episode that we did around, was after I'd weighed. I said it's never affected me. After I would weigh, do you remember I talked about heading back and grabbing a bag of Haribo?
Yes.
And so I remember the weight was a bit higher than what I thought it would be. But at the time being like, that's fine. It's not a problem. Was it the last episode we spoke about it on the Ask Us Anything, where I talked about my self-esteem and just being good at defending against shame? Was that last week's episode? Or was that in the
It was the Q&A episode with our members.
So I haven't said it on the podcast, but Steph said to me previously around thinking that I had this higher self-esteem, but I think I'm quite good at blocking that. Again, like, it's fine. I can know my weight. No problem. And then I smash a bag of Haribo afterwards. I'm like, that felt compulsive. What was that all about? Oh, I was a little bit like, about the number, a little bit itchy about the number, but I convinced myself in my mind it was fine. And actually, like, in my body, my felt sense was it wasn't quite fine. And it's really weird. They do it when I go to the endocrinologist and you sign in for your appointment. And the first thing that happens is a nurse takes you in a room, which is just to be weighed. So there's some poor nurse that all they do every day is like weigh people as you go in. And I do remember for a few years, probably for about 4 years, I used to just not look, and I would just look at the wall and didn't see it. And it was an electronic scale.
So you couldn't tell what notch they were on?
I couldn't tell anything from that. Just their gasp of horror told me everything. No, I'm just kidding. But I can remember one time when I was in a really difficult place with my eating disorder, not looking, and then going in to see the endocrinologist, and I'm sitting next to her on the desk and she's got her folder open and I just see it written down.
Right.
And again, I was like, okay, I didn't really want to know that, but it's fine. It's fine. Mm-hmm. I'm fine with knowing it.
Right. Well, that's what I think how realistic is it that we can always be completely neutral about this number? And to your point of like, all right, now I want to just neutralize it. So do I suppose, right? I would like to just neutralize it. And I could, I think, if I exposed myself to it enough, right? Like over and over, and it wasn't something I saw just once in a while. I think you just become accustomed to it. And also for reasons of fat phobia, I'm aware that like it's like, well, why would I be afraid of a number unless I had internalized it? The ideal way that I'd like to be is a work in progress. And so I know that there's going to be times or days or susceptibilities and vulnerabilities to that number. And am I prepared to deal with that right now? Do I need to deal with that right now? As far as my own, it's not interrupting my life in any one bit to not know the number. So I don't have a reason to investigate that more fully until I have to, at which point I would. But at this point, I just don't have to.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back
What
to the
advice
episode.
would you give to somebody who is going to the doctors? They don't want to be weighed, but they're really anxious about asking not to be weighed. How would you coach someone through that?
Oh, they're anxious about the request to not?
Yes.
So this has come up before, and a part of it is it will be uncomfortable. All right. So if there is an adamant like no, I'm not comfortable asking, I'd go down one road. But more often what I'm hearing is I want to ask not to be weighed, but I'm not comfortable doing that, but I want to be. And so it is uncomfortable, I think. That any time that we're stepping out of our comfort zone, especially I spoke to somebody about this earlier in the week, and they said, I've always been the kind of person who just does what I'm told and does what I'm asked, kind of like people pleaser. So it's like, well, then it's going to be uncomfortable, right? There's an expectation of that you can go in with, knowing that when you say these words and as they come out of your mouth, there's going to be some kind of like in your body, right? And I think managing that expectation is important, rather than assuming you're just going to walk in and confidently request that you're not, I think we sometimes have this image of being this advocate, and going in for ourselves, and especially on social media where it's posted like, this is what I don't ask and you can too. And it's this empowerment angle that we don't feel necessarily the first time. And so managing that expectation. And the other thing I say is, you don't have to go in, like everything's in your tone. You can still be authentic to your tone of voice. And, you don't have to go in and say, no, I will not be weighed, unless that is your personality. And you're like, no, I decline to be weighed. So deal with that, versus, sometimes people find it comfortable to say, I'm working on, healing from an eating disorder. I'm working on my relationship with my body and I'd prefer not to be weighed, and to offer an explanation. And still others are going to say, I don't want to explain myself at all. I just want to say, is it okay if I don't? There's so many different ways of requesting or stating that you don't want to be weighed. And you can experiment with what feels most comfortable to you, with also the understanding that it may feel a bit uncomfortable anyway.
There was somewhere that was doing those cards. I can't remember. It was an organization or an Instagram account. They were talking about these cards where it just said, please don't ask for me to be weighed unless medically necessary.
Yeah. We'll find it and put the link for that.
Yeah. Or create your own. You can even just write that on a little bit of card if it feels quite difficult to say, and then hand it over before you're even asked. And then you don't have to deal with the request directly.
Yeah. To me, that would actually be more uncomfortable.
Yeah,
for others, it would be less. And I think it's knowing yourself, what you're more comfortable with or not. And having a go-to statement, I think maybe like kind of in your back pocket, rehearsed in your brain, like, I decline to be weighed, or no weight, please. Just having something where like in that moment where you're like, you're just like, oh, no weight, please. You just kind of say what you've been practicing.
What would yours be?
My go-to?
Yeah, if the doctor said, I'd like to weigh you now.
I think I just say, I don't want to be weighed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I say. I don't want to be weighed.
Yeah. I would always go with, I prefer not to. And I say that when people ask for my email address. Shops sometimes they want to, can I have your email address, the receipt? And I just say, I prefer not to.
Yeah. I say, no, thank you.
Thank you so much for asking. I really
appreciate it. I really appreciate it. It's so unauthentic. I'm not thankful. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
But it's part of it is an exercise in comfort, in developing more comfort in being able to say no, where that isn't necessarily something that's easy. To be able to say, this is something I do prefer or not prefer. That is part of, I think, learning how to own ourselves and say what we want and what we need or don't need.
Yeah.
I think it's different if you're like arguing with a medical assistant or something, and it's like causing a ruckus, which I think, first of all, in some places it still does, because I have heard some stories about that where it's been an issue where someone's declined it because it's just not the norm in the office, or the office will come back and say it's the office policy. It's not insurance's policy, but it's the office policy that someone is weighed.
I was just thinking then, so is it different for you in America? Do your insurers have to know your weight?
No.
Don't you have your weight on your driving licenses and stuff like that? No?
No, it's not. It's weight, no. Height, yes.
Oh, I thought there was a weight.
At least, I don't think so.
I thought it was referenced in a film once. Maybe there's a state.
I think I would know if my weight was on my license.
I think it would be like, I don't even know. I don't know how it's on my license.
I certainly haven't updated it. Once, though, I did go out into a doctor's office, and the girl was like, I need to write your weight down. And I was like, no. And, I don't want to be weighed. She's like, well, I need to write it down here. And so she's like, do you know an approximate weight? And I was like, no. So she just backs up and looks at me. Starts like determining it for herself. That was worse. I remember being like, oh my gosh.
Did you see the number she wrote down?
No.
Okay.
No. But I was like, oh my goodness. And then I was there for Lyme disease. It was a consultation it wasn't even a consultation. It was a follow-up. It had nothing to do with anything. Yeah. But it's just so programmed. And so I have heard that some people say like it's office policy to have, or someone needs to just put a number in the computer in order to move to the next screen, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then it's just more and more awkward. Having a script for something like that and knowing, again, half the time you don't even need to. I think we over prepare, but there are cases in which it may become a thing, and having some sort of idea of what to say. That's where those cards can be useful, giving ideas about what you can say if you do come up against some resistance.
Yeah.
But I think when we're talking about fear of weight, like why do we have this fear of weight aside from internalized fat phobia, right? Like are there any other reasons why we would be afraid of seeing our weight or needing to track it and needing to know what it is or to make sure it's at a certain place? What are other reasons that might exist for people? Why is there a compulsion to weigh?
I think there's a desire for certainty, a desire to assess something. When the number's what we want the number to be, calories, weight, whatever it might be, there can be a sense of safety in that, of knowing. I've seen a few people go through this where they are been doing a lot of work, and maybe they've even started a fitness program or something like that alongside their recovery. And so they're trying to fight with this fitness versus not focusing on weight loss thing. And they've been feeling great for a few weeks. Like, I feel stronger and my body feels great and I feel like I can do all these things. And then one day, for whatever reason, they think, I just want to see if the scale reflects what I'm feeling. I want that confirmation. I've even heard those words used. Like, I wanted confirmation that what I felt was happening to me was happening to me. And more often I've seen it's not what they've expected, more often than not. And how quickly something like that, it's almost like getting in that and I've been there, that fear that, I was just kidding myself. I was kidding myself of what I thought was going on, then wasn't going on.
Right. It's this, I think it's like something human about our need to, about the mind-body connection, about this, what is vague and abstract and emotions, like feelings that you can't touch or see or measure. We like to have something that we can see, touch, and measure as proof of it, or as a validation or reassurance, like this does exist. And I think that's normal. I think where we've gotten thwarted is that we do believe that a weight or a body size is that thing, right? And I think that that's part of the unlearning. Because have you ever also I felt this way personally. I know I've been eating a lot and I just need to confirm that the opposite way. Like, I feel like I've gained 10 pounds and I just need to know it. And it's like, you just wait for it to show up on the scale because you know it's coming. I think that there's this idea of a number offering that sense, again, of that orientation of what I perceive to be happening is happening, whether that's weight gain or weight loss, as some kind of, there is a predictable sequence that I can rely on. There is a sense of control and the reliance on okay, something makes sense. More and more, I hear that being a theme too, where it's evidence of something that we can't otherwise know without knowing. It's like we might know something, but we don't feel like we know it until it's in the world. And I think that's human too. And that's why I don't think it's necessary to pathologize always like something of that need for that reflection. But what I think that there's other layers of what that number means and how we are assigning it. It doesn't necessarily follow that feeling good means you've lost weight. That's part of a cultural belief system and part of a learned thing. What other ways of knowing that do you see? How is that showing up in observable behaviors or other sort of measures? I just think we've linked weight to so many positive or negative outcomes that we're looking to, and it's just like, that's a readjustment.
Agreed. For me, and I don't want to project this or assume this to be true about anybody else, but for me, it was definitely about a lack of self-trust. That desire for that external something. It's like, how can I trust how I feel when how I feel changes so much? This feels a constant this idea of hard evidence. Mm-hmm. And I was also very much convinced around the weight thing that, I think I've said this before, if I stopped binging, then all the weight was just going to fall off me. I couldn't separate the two, this idea of recovery. I assumed recovery meant weight loss. Like I thought losing weight was part of how you recover as such.
Yeah.
And even when I was starting to realize that wasn't true, I was still bouncing in and out of that. So I'd have these times when I wasn't binging and where the amount I was eating in my mind was like, this should equal weight loss.
Yeah.
And that somehow I was doing recovery wrong if I wasn't losing weight, because there was no one around at that time talking about weight gain during recovery. So for me, weight gain would be evidence that I wasn't recovering. Yeah. And now you see it everywhere. I never, ever heard that message when I was in it. So I assumed that even staying the same meant I wasn't really healing. And that was, took a while to keep unsticking myself from that.
It's the same with health. Right? Like health, if you're improving your health, you must be losing weight. They're completely conflated in so many areas of discussion, where it's really not seen as separate. And we have to teach ourselves that. Like, no, like health does not have to go along with your weight. They're separate entities. It's just that they so often are joined up. Yeah. The other one last thing I want to bring up as a theme around weight is that this concept of sometimes I think when we are feeling, I need to see the number because I don't want to feel like I'm kidding myself.
Yes. Those words just, hit me.
and I'm glad you reacted that way, because that sentence of I'm kidding myself to me has nothing to do with weight. To me, there's this, I don't know. I have this emotional attachment to that phrase as a larger message. Of growing up and feeling like I was naive to something, or the way that I was brought up and like the way that I was taught to change was through more of a shame approach. So it was kind of this idea of like, you're just kidding yourself if you think, again, with the depression that I was in, you're kidding yourself if you think this is like mental illness, you're just lazy, and that affecting self-trust, right? Like this idea of, oh my gosh, how dare I feel good about myself if there's not some kind of evidence supporting that I should be feeling good about myself. Which I think is another reason why sometimes we feel like we need to know so that we know where we are, because we're not safe to tell ourselves where we are or who we are, or what we, whatever is the reality of our situation. I think that's a bigger thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's about it for today.
I love that. It was kind of like just a full stop after that. That's about it. See you later, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye. Let's just fade out on that. Let's just leave it at that. No, that would be funny. No, leave it at that. I like it.
Just abandon them.